Hello gang, and thanks for joining me on another episode of The New Ham. My name is Scott, call sign W4OLV. So I know a lot of you are at home and kind of trapped indoors at this point. So you'll notice I've got a few things laid out on the table here. What I'm going to do is show you guys how to turn some common household wiring like this into a ground plane antenna like this. Stay tuned. All right, gang, just to go over some of the materials you're going to need. So this is just standard household wiring. You'll need probably about 3.5 feet of this. I've had some of it laying around for probably the better part of 10 years from a couple of projects that I've done. So I've got quite a bit of it. That's what made this project fairly appealing for me. You will need some type of tool to be able to cut the wire. You're going to need a soldering iron, some solder, flux as well, and then, of course, a tape measure. And you're going to have to get one of these little fellows right here, which is an SO239. You can buy, I believe it's either a 5-pack or a 6-pack. They're off of Amazon. It's $6 or $7 for the entire pack. And then you will need 4... just standard screws, and then 4 nuts and 4 washers. There are the sizes for you. Now on the screw there, you can probably, I got, and it looks like, what did I get? A 0.5 by 16. You could probably do with a slightly shorter one. I ended up, those are a little bit long on my first finished product, so you probably don't need them quite that long. You could go with maybe like a 12, and that would get it done. So what you do is you're going to take your wire, and you're going to take all of this sheathing off. You're going to have a ground wire in there, and that's what these bare wires are. They're 22¼ inches long, each one of those 4 stripped copper wires. And then I've got another one that's still sheathed in the black, but you'll notice that I have stripped one end of it, about 1 inch long. Now, the other thing that I did to that, you may not be able to notice. Oh, focus. See if we can get it to focus here. Well, easier. There we go. You may notice that it's been sanded down just a little bit. The reason that is sanded down is since this is a 12 gauge wire, that 12 gauge wire is just a little bit too thick to fit in the end of the tip there. So I needed to sand it down just a tiny bit. So if you're using 12 gauge, just know you're probably going to have to sand that down just a tiny bit. So that's the materials that you need. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera back up real quick, and then we'll just sit down here at the desk, and I'll start putting some of it together and show you some of the little tips here on how to construct it. And then we'll also show you how to solder that radiating element into your SO239. I'll be right back. All right, gang, so what we're going to do is we're going to tin the end of our radiating element. Now again, this radiating element is 19.5 inches long. And then we're also going to do a little tin on the inside of our SO239. We're not going to add a ton of solder to the inside. We're just going to give it just enough to help us get the connection and get this seated in here completely. So we're just going to put a little bit of flux on this. What's nice is this is roughed up from the sanding, so it should take it pretty darn well. I need something to prop that up just a little bit. I know, we'll use this right here, and we will just clip that in. Just like that. grab our solder. And this should be a pretty quick process for this piece. It's the SO239 that's kind of a pain because you don't want to get too much down in there. So you got to be a little bit careful because it'll take off on you pretty quickly. And this should be warmed up. And you'll see that that just... Yeah. Hang on here. Kind of hard to do standing up. There we go. And we're just going to spread that around there. All right. That should do it. And you'll see we just got a nice coating all the way around. And that little bead up at the top is fine. We'll get it to drop down into our SO239 pretty easily. We're not going to put a whole lot on here. Just enough to kind of get a little bit of start for it when we do this. When we put this together. Excuse my sniffles, just allergy laden here lately. Take that, put it out of the way here. And you'll see that just goes down just like that. And we're just going to put that little bead right there, and that is it. So one of the other things that I typically do with this is I'm going to put this down here, but I usually strip the insulation off of these completely. This is a little bit of an experiment for me. I'm going to leave it on and see if it impacts this at all. It shouldn't, but if it does, then I can just strip it off later fairly easily. So this is the tricky part. We want to get this seated down in here just right. And then the other part that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of shrink wrap, which I don't think I put in my parts list, but we're going to take a piece of shrink wrap and just put down over top of that, and we're going to shrink wrap it, or not shrink wrap, but covering anyway. And we're just going to heat this back up again. Easier said than done, right? Oh, come on. If you get this heated just right, it basically all just kind of falls down there together. Like I said, this part is sometimes easier said than done. Oh, there it went. And you'll see that we've got there we go. And you'll see it just kind of falls down in there. And when it does, and it falls down in there right, you remember that little hump that we had over here? We'll just melt that down. And we'll just kind of smooth it out so that it just kind of comes to the top of the SO239. And you can tell that they're connected now because whenever I'm turning the radiating element that I've connected there, it turns with it. And that's all the soldering that's involved. That's it. Everything else is manual connections using the screws. And you can see that it's pretty simple. So all we did was tin the tip. We put a little bead at the top of this on 239 so that when we put them together and heated it up, we could basically just drop it down in there and the solder would all go down into the inside and make a nice solid connection. And that's it. That's all there is to that part. we're done with the soldering. So give me just a second. Let me unplug everything, get this stuff out of the way, and I'll show you the rest of the connections. So you can leave this exactly like it is. There's no harm in that at all. I take one extra step. What I do is I just take a piece of shrink wrap and I put it all the way down there. That way I can cover up that bare wire. And the other part is I can keep water out. If for some reason this were to get outside or something and get a little bit of water in it, we wouldn't have to worry about anything getting down. It's coming up on me. Make sure it stays down. And not only that, the other part that this does is it gives us a nice little aesthetic on there. Cleans it up just a little bit. I'm gonna let that cool just a second, and then what we'll do is we will attach the radials, which are pretty simple. So one of the things you do have to do the radials. So these are actually supposed to be cut at 21 3/4. I give myself an extra 1/2 inch because we have to wrap it around. So what you have to do is you've got to create a little loop at the end, and that takes up just a little bit of our radial doing that. And this is a little bit of trial and error about how big you need that loop, because you want to be too big, but it's got to be just, it really needs to be just barely big enough so that the screw goes down in there, and you kind of want it, you can feel it scraping the sides a little bit, which is about perfect. I'm going to narrow it down just a tiny bit more. And then this is a very simple process as well. All we're doing is you're going to see there's 4 holes in the top of this. I'm just going to take that. We're going to put a washer. I'm going to put a washer on our screw there, and we're just going to run it right down through that hole, and then we're going to add the nut down at the bottom here. And that is it. Now I just kind of leave these loose. I don't fool with them a whole lot when I'm first assembling, because we've got to go through this whole thing again. So I'm gonna speed this up a little bit so that you guys can see how the rest of it goes together. It is just kind of a rinse and repeat process. Alright guys, so that finishes up getting our radials on. You can see I had a little bit of trouble with that last one. Didn't want to quite go through the loop I created. So now this is very simple. All you've got to do is tighten these down so that they're out. straight off of the corner of each side here. And they're just going to run straight out. So I'm going to take a minute to tighten those up, and then we'll come right back and I'll show you the finished product. Hey guys, I appreciate you sticking with me thus far while I'm tightening the screws on that crazy antenna and getting it all ready to come back for you. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up, hit the bell so that you get notified every time a new video comes out here on the new ham. Now, let's jump back to that antenna. Alright gang, we're back. And again, it's just simply tightening down these 4 screws, and you'll see they just run off of the corners. Now, the next trick is you're going to come out just a tiny bit, and we're just going to bend these down just a little on each one, and then I'll show you what that looks like at a little bit broader view. We'll just bend the nose down a little bit, and I usually come out maybe about an inch or so, and I just kind of make it a long rounding edge on that, and this thing will almost stand up. Not quite, but just about. But essentially now you have a ground plane antenna. Let me get you a better view of that. That will stand up. Now again, each ground plane that you have coming off, ground radial rather, coming off, it was 22.5 inches long, or 22.25 inches long, 22.25. And the main radiating element on the top is 19.5. You have the SO32, 4 screws, 4 washers, and 4 nuts. This is a very simple assembly for a UHF, VHF ground plane antenna, a good little afternoon project. It'll only take you somewhere right around maybe 45 minutes to an hour. You can see the assembly is pretty easy. I did I kind of did some of the pre-work going ahead and cutting it. Now, I didn't have to do a ton of work because I used the ground leads out of that wire, and those ground leads are already stripped. I only had to strip 1, so that saves a lot of time as well. So what we're going to do now, so we're going to shoot over, we're going to hook up the Nano VNA, and then we'll show you what kind of SWR we got on it, and then I'm going to go back to my original build, and I'm going to show you kind of a neat little trick that I did with that to make it a little bit sturdier with a different type of technique in making the radials for that. So we'll be right back. All right, gang, we're back. We've got the Nano VNA running. I've also got my screen capture going for you so that we can share it with you. We're going to hook it up. I've already taken care of calibrating the Nano, and you can see here we've got the antenna hooked up on the other end. So let's see where we ended up here. We're going to connect to the Nano. And we're going to... So we've got it set for 144 to 149, 146.5 being the center. And let's see how we did. And let's sweep. We're going to do a continuous. And let's see where we end up here. And hit that sweep button one more time. All right. We're not too bad. We're a little out on the high end. We could probably play around with the radials just a little bit. But down at 144, we're at a 1.3. At 146.5, we're at 1.6. we climb up to about a 1.77 at 149. So we're a little bit high. We could probably tweak that too. I've also got all of my coax coiled up down here. So if we uncoiled that and stretch that out a little bit, that's going to come down. Let's see what that does when we stretch it out. Hang on. So this is a pretty short piece of coax. That coax is only I think 18 feet long, so it's not very long at all. But when you've got it all coiled up like that, especially right here at my feet, that can make a difference, and it does. So when we look at it now on that high side at the 149, we're at 1.6. So we're approaching that 1.5. Anytime I make a homemade antenna, I like to get it down below 1.5. I could probably tweak the length of the radials a little bit and see what we come up with. The thing about it is being down here at 146.5, we're right dead on 1.5. I think it would work. I think it would be a fun little toy to play with. Again, the other thing that you can do is cut your radials just a little bit long, and you can shorten them and tweak this as you go. And that's one of the reasons I always cut them just a tiny bit long, because I'm sure that if we tweak this just a tiny bit. The other part is typically I take the sheathing off of the element, the radiating element, and I didn't this time. That could have something to do with it as well. I'm not overly concerned with that. I'll just leave it on. This is just kind of a fun project. You get an opportunity to see just how well you can build an antenna. Now, the measurements that I took are from an app, and it's called Amateur Radio. I know you can find it for Apple, iOS. I'm not sure if it is an Android app or not, but it's got a bunch of different antennas in there. All you have to do is plug in a frequency, and it will tell you what length to either cut your wires or cut your radials and your element in order to make almost any type of antenna you want to make, including a J-pole. If you want to get into building J-pole stuff for HF or even a VHF J-pole. I don't know if it has ladder line. I haven't really looked in that part of it. But you can see just by looking at this that this is a suitable antenna to play with. And now it's not by any means going to reach out 40, 50, 60 miles, but you may gain maybe out to 30, 35 miles for this particular antenna. I know my previous one did. Speaking of my previous one, I'm going to show you another little trick. So you'll see on this antenna, it's built just like the other one. Now this is just all shrink wrap, but you should be able to see that this is twisted. So this is the same type of copper wire that I used before, but there's a loop up at the top, and then I took it and ran the other end back down and just simply twisted it all together for one element and then clipped it to length. This one is set exactly the same. This is 19.5, and these are 21 and right at a quarter as far as overall length goes. And it's just SO239, got it soldered together, 4 screws. This one, however, it works a little bit better. Matter of fact, I'll show you. Let me hook it up. Now you can see there where I unhooked that, and now we're going to hook the first one I made up, and we should see a little bit of a difference there in the overall SWR on this particular one. And you'll see that my SWR on this one, because I was a little bit more meticulous in cutting, I was a little bit more meticulous in how I put this one together, but at 144 you can see that SWR is 1.28, 144.8 we're at 1.25, 145.7 we're at 122, 146.5, which is what I calibrated this antenna for, is at 1.18. So we're at 1.2 essentially. 147.3, we're at 1.16. 148, 1.13, and then when we get down to 149, we're at 115 on a SWR. So all of this is well below 1.5. I don't know if twisting that helps. It seems to be a slightly better antenna than just doing it with the single strand radial. You can test that theory out, but I've made a couple of these and it always seems that this twisted one comes out a little bit better every single time. Gang, I appreciate you guys joining me today. Fun little project, again, something that you can sit down and do in maybe 45 minutes to an hour. Have yourself a little antenna, play with it. I will leave the links to the SO239 part on Amazon. Again, it's like $7. You'll need to make sure though that you got all the other stuff. You can do this with wire coat hangers. So if you have some wire coat hangers, grab some of those, cut them down to size, and you can use those as well. Takes a little bending and prodding. The other part is those coat rods, our coat hangers are coated with an enamel. On the areas where you have to connect that to the SO239, you're going to have to sand that enamel off completely. I would say at least a good inch on every one of those radials, and the radiating element need to be sanded off completely, so you're going to have to put in a little elbow grease to get that done. But that's another cheap way to make the antenna. Give it a try, guys. It's a fun project, especially if you're just beginning. You can extend the reach of your Baofeng just by hooking that up and having a little adapter that you can hook to your antenna and use your handheld on and have a little fun with it. So guys, give it a try and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.